Hello and welcome to the fourth video in this series on Chapter 8 of Government in America, focusing on political parties. In this video, we're going to focus on national party organizations and sort of the history of national parties in the United States. When we talk about the national party organization, some of the key um, you know, entities to consider are, first of all, the national committees. The national committees are the groups that try and coordinate all of the local and state parties and get them all moving in the same direction, so that the party as a whole has a coherent image across the whole country. You wouldn't want the Democrats in Pennsylvania to be a liberal party, but the Democrats in Oregon to be a conservative party, because then that would confuse people. And so you want to try and keep the state organizations in good relationships with each other. So the national committee helps try and keep that together. And then they kind of help determine the direction by setting up the system for how is the party going to nominate a president, what is the party going to stand for, so on and so forth. So there is a Democratic National Committee, the DNC, and a Republican National Committee, the RNC. So you may hear those terms in political coverage, and that's what they're referring to, the organizations that try and keep all of the state groups together. The National Committee is headed by a national chairperson. A lot of times this person is not necessarily the day-to-day runner of the organization. The chairperson is someone who serves as a spokesperson and a representative for the party, who can sort of speak on behalf of all of its elected officials, and can kind of set a big picture for how the organization is going to run. So that's kind of what the national chairperson's job. The chairperson and the committee have to organize the system for nominating a presidential candidate and holding a national convention every 4 years. The convention is this big meeting where representatives or delegates from all over the country, and including territories, which don't get a vote in a presidential election, but they do get to come to the convention and have a say in the nominee. They get together and they hear speeches and they talk about how they're going to be organized and how they're going to get things done, and they make decisions about what is the party going to do and what is it going to stand for the next 4 years. It's early 2016 as I'm recording this, and in 2016 the Democrats are going to hold their national convention here in Philadelphia. So that's something that I'm looking forward to as a way of being able to observe up close how this all gets put together. Now, at the convention, the party and the delegates will officially write and approve a party platform. Now, that's a statement of what the party wants to do if it wins enough elections that they have the power to do what they want to do. States do sometimes put together state platforms as well, but the national platforms are what get the most coverage. Now, the national platform is not quite an ironclad promise, as it is in some other countries, but it's still a significant thing because this is what the party is saying it stands for. Now, the trick with developing a platform is parties are big groups, especially because, as we pointed out before, America usually only has two big parties at one time. So you have to fit a lot of people inside each party, and they don't always agree with each other. Parties are not people who 100% agree. They're people who have different ideas that agree to work together. It's a coalition of people with their own agendas who have come together because they think that by being together and helping each other out, it'll get them further on the way they want to go. But because all of these parts of the coalition want something, sometimes they all have their demands about what gets put uh, into into the platform. So the platform doesn't always perfectly match any particular candidate, which means that there's not a guarantee that if I elect Bob the Democrat um, to the Senate, that Bob the Democrat is going to automatically support uh, everything that's in the Democratic platform. Maybe Bob the Democrat is, anti-abortion, while the Democratic Party platform supports abortion rights. Well, maybe Bob the Democrat isn't going to vote with the platform all the time, but he's still part of the coalition. He's still working with the party, and so that's kind of how that works. Um, Not only does a coalition have to negotiate what's in the platform, but then when they try and implement the platform, they have to negotiate the laws as well, and that can get complicated. So, again, it's really complicated in the United States because we usually only have two major parties at any given time. Now, that's not to say that there are only two parties. There are lots of smaller parties that want attention and might even be able to get people elected to some offices. Um, all of these smaller parties are referred to as third parties, regardless of how many of them there are, because they're all in third place behind the Republicans and the Democrats right now. Now, we've had the Republicans and the Democrats as the two major parties in the United States since basically the Civil War. When Abraham Lincoln got elected president in 1860 as a Republican, pretty much from then on out, it's been Republicans or Democrats, as president, and Republicans or Democrats in control of the United States Congress. But before the Civil War, it wasn't the Republicans and the Democrats. And even since the Civil War, what the Republicans and what the Democrats have stood for has not always been exactly the same. So political historians look back on America, and they identify several different party eras, periods of time where two fairly stable parties are competing with each other. Now, no party era lasts forever. Sooner or later, something happens that changes the way the voters are thinking. A large chunk of voters that previously had been part of one coalition decides that they no longer want to be in that coalition. They want to move to a different one. When a large group of people move from one party to another, that's party realignment. The parties are realigning. They're lining up in different ways. And we're entering a new period. Now, some people do talk about de-alignment, which is simply people leave the party they're in, but they don't go join the other one. Usually, if there's de-alignment, that's a precursor to there being realignment further down the road. But, there is a little distinction there. Now, we can sort of tell that a realignment is happening when we notice a bunch of people who have historically supported one party switch and vote for the opposite party. Even if they're still saying that they're members of their original party, they've started to switch their behavior. 1968, for example, was one of these times where a lot of Southern Democrats in particular voted for Richard Nixon, the Republican candidate. So 1968 was an example of what we call a critical election. A critical election is one where we start to see the lineups change and people move from one side to another. Now, a lot of times you can't be 100% sure that an election was a critical election until you kind of go a few years afterwards and see if the new pattern holds up. If it's a one-time deal, then in retrospect, we don't call it a critical election. But in the case of 1968, definitely it was, because we were seeing a move that really has taken the last, 40 years or so to play out. So, as we said, that political historians have a number of party eras, and so very briefly, the first of these was at the very beginning of our constitutional system, when the people who wanted a very, very strong central government that would look out for sort of the future business prospects of the United States of America were the Federalists, and then the people who wanted a strong central government, stronger than the Articles of Confederation had been, but not super strong. They wanted to kind of still leave things back to the people. They were the Democratic Republicans. The Federalists are most identified with John Adams and Alexander Hamilton. The Democratic Republicans are strongly lined up with Thomas Jefferson. So this system lasted for a little while. Really, the Federalists kind of fell apart pretty quickly, but it took a while for a new party to come up and replace them. Eventually, the Whig Party did, and they again were more of a centralized, have the federal government do things to help build the nation, including its business type of party. The Democratic Republicans were more look out for the little farmers, the little people, and not have the federal government take too much control. So that was the two-party system for the early 1800s. Ultimately, slavery wrecked the Whig Party. They couldn't figure out what to do about slavery, and the Whig Party fell apart. The anti-slavery Whigs and other people got together. They formed the Republican Party, and they won in 1860. You had the Civil War and then Reconstruction. So you get the first period of Republicans versus Democrats, where the Republicans really dominated the presidency, but the Democrats had control of the South for a large chunk of that. Then you get to the Great Depression and the New Deal, and the Democrats come in, and Franklin Roosevelt is able to get into the presidency, and the Democrats win like 5 straight presidential elections, and then win a couple more, and they put in their programs to kind of build the kind of economy that we have today. But after the Democrats signed civil rights legislation, we started to see a shift, and a lot of those Southern Democrats started moving over towards the Republican Party, and that's what we've been seeing over the last 30 to 40 years especially, is looking at how that plays out and how that kind of shapes the country. So that's a quick rundown of the history of the party eras. In the final video in this series next, we'll take a look at why do we tend to have two-party systems, and what is it about America that narrows us down to two parties. So we'll conclude the chapter there. Until then, take care.